So we have officially entered 2025, and this is a year that's going to be full of really big events, big movies. I'm really excited to see where it goes. I want to take time in this video to talk about the future of my channel, but also to explore something that I've noticed across entertainment as a whole, just movies, series, video games, stuff I like to do in this channel, dissect, go into the deeper meanings of stuff. That's all stuff we like to do here. But I have noticed a trend in recent years since the pandemic began with video games, and probably a little bit before with movies and TV shows, that there's been a really big decline in quality with stuff. In other words, the thing that is colloquially known as slop. Now, I know slop is a word that gets thrown around a lot of these days, such as brain rot, which is basically meaningless at this point because anything can be brain rot, but it's usually associated with low quality content in the case of brain rot with stuff like AI, but slop has a much wider meaning. People have been applying it to a lot of things, and I think it's very valid. Things like food, for example, in the case of ultra processed food, junk food, to just basically low quality filler content, such as movies, video games, such as a lot of stinkers we had in the last couple of years. So in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over what slop is, what it isn't, formulate my own theory of slop, because I want to really get to the bottom of this and see why there's so much low quality stuff, and also kind of like trace the future of my channel, because I'm not going to leave the channel. I'm not going to say that like, oh, I'm just going to stop making videos because everything is low quality. That's not my goal. But I feel like I'm going to take a new direction of focusing on things that I want to do. So we're going to circle back to that point in the video. But first, I want to focus on what slop isn't and what it is. So we're going to pull out the dictionary for this one first. According to Merriam-Webster, slop means thin, tasteless drink or liquid food. Food waste, such as garbage, fed to animals. And I think that is an accurate yet a crude analogy. Slop is something that is just low quality, trash content. I feel like there's a lot of key elements to that we're going to discuss later on. But I want to focus first on what it isn't, because there are two things that I want to focus on. A bad movie, video game series does not mean it's slop, and vice versa. So as an example, let's take the recent movie Joker Folie à Deux, the second part of the great first Joker movie. I think the movie was terrible. It was a travesty. I didn't like it, but at the same time, I don't think it's slop. And I think the reason it's not slop is because this movie, even though it has a ton of flaws, I think it did something original. It's something that just goes outside the box of what even a superhero movie is. Because superhero movies, I think, have become almost synonymous with the term slop, with all the recent ones since Endgame finished the first part of the MCU. Or for example, there's some qualities that the Joker movie has that takes it out of like the sloppiness of what it's supposed to be. And that's why I don't consider it slop. In the reverse, a movie can be slop, but at the same time be good. Like, let me repeat that because it's an important point. Even if a movie is considered slop by me, by my definition of slop we're gonna go into, I think it can still be enjoyable. A recent example is the movie Red One with Dwayne Johnson and Chris Evans. There is no doubt that this movie is slop. Like a lot of the Rock movies, I feel like it just goes into slop territory. It's just like really mass produced, just like by the numbers garbage that is just there to turn your brain off and just like to numb you to the senses that are going on in the screen. That doesn't necessarily make it a bad movie. Another example might be like the later Fast and Furious movies up until the 10th one, which I thought was actually bad. But for example, 7, 8, 9 were really enjoyable. Even the spin-off with The Rock, I think it was a fun experience at the theater, but I do consider them slop movies. As a final point, I want to add that low quality products on the mere basis that they're bad, for example, just like, or movies that are obviously bad, like either intentionally or not intentionally, for example, The Room, because they're just simply bad quality. I think the term slop is reserved for those products that are more high budget and are designed more with the intention of making money. Now, for the second point of what slop is not, popular does not mean that the movie is automatically slop. I think it is important to make that distinction because people think that if a movie is popular, if everybody's going to see it, and then it means that it's mass produced for the greatest amount of people. And to that extension, I'm going to add like superhero movies does not mean that the movie is automatically slop. I'm going to take the most popular example I can find of is Avengers Infinity War, Avengers Endgame, and also I'll add to that Spider-Man No Way Home. Infinity War and Endgame were movies that I thought were just amazing. I can still remember the first time I saw that movie at the theater. Everybody there lost it like a troglodyte at a tech convention. And that happened for every single one of these movies. And they're just like some of the most popular. I think they made like $2 billion each. I do not consider them slop, even though Marvel movies, DC is associated with just like slop movies and just like by the numbers. Let's make the most mass-produced thing we can imagine. Even though the stories don't make sense, especially in Endgame and No Way Home, which is basically the plot is non-existent in No Way Home. I do not consider these movies slop, even though they're popular. Another example is the Avatar movies. So Avatar is another funny example because I think they're really overrated movies. I will give it that. But I don't consider them slop. I think there's a lot of intention behind it. And also, for example, James Cameron worked on these movies for decades. He's still making the next few movies. It's just like a really big, high budget passion project. And I feel like the intention behind it is what separates it from the slop. So I don't consider those movies slop either. It is important to notice that all of these movies have slop-like qualities. However, they still don't quite reach that threshold that I consider in slop because, like I said before, they have intention behind them and a clear purpose to serve. So I don't consider them slop, but I can see how a lot of people might disagree with me. But I think that's entirely subjective. I don't consider them slop. If you do, let me know in the comments. But now what we're going to do is we're going to go into what slop actually is. So for this video, I compiled two lists, one in Letterboxd, the other one in Backlog, going over TV shows and movies on Letterboxd about what slop is. And in Backlog, I'm going to go over the games that I consider slop. So like I mentioned in the beginning, it's kind of hard to actually determine what it is because it's a word that gets thrown around, so I just formulated my own theory. Let's call it the KST, otherwise known as the Keegan Slop Theory. So even though there's a very subjective feeling of what slop is, I feel like it boils down to a couple points. For example, if it appears like it was put together by a committee of people, like just like a corporate, meeting room type of situation instead of an actual human being, like a writer or director that pour their soul into delivering a product, I consider it slop. So it's kind of hard to determine this because obviously there's a lot of people working on these different projects. It's not a single person making that the thing. It's just impossible. But there is a point to be made that a lot of these movies, even though they have a director attached to the name, are just, you can tell that it's just like they have almost no input. It's just basically all controlled from the top down. And that's what it is. The second point for the KST to determine if a movie is slop or not is that it lacks an actual direction and purpose for its existence. In other words, a reason for it to exist that does not involve actual money. As an example, I'm going to give the universe that I hate the most on this planet. It is the Sony Spider-Man universe without Spider-Man. That universe has more plot holes than Swiss cheese and is as satisfying as blue balls because at the end of the day, after 6 movies, I believe, the Venom trilogy plus Venom Web, Morbius, Craven, I think, that's 6 movies, it got nowhere. It's just an absolute travesty of a saga that started with nothing and ended with nothing. There is no purpose for its existence. It just doesn't really accomplish anything. And it didn't accomplish anything. And you can tell it was just basically like all the other 5 movies that were greenlit after the success of Venom was precisely because of that, because it made, I think, almost $1 billion. And, well, you gotta keep making money, so get more asses on seats, and that's it. So yeah, I consider all those movies slop. And now the third point for the KST is something that's a little bit more subjective, but it's that a product, like a movie or a game, it's trying to be something that it's not. For example, the DC Extended Universe. It is something that began entirely as a way to try to copy Marvel of its success, and you can add a couple things to that. For example, I think Universal wanted to make a shared universe with its monsters, like the classic, the werewolf, the vampire, all that kind of stuff. And it is clearly there that everybody wanted to copy Marvel as quickly as possible because you gotta keep on track with the money, you can't lose all the cash, and they failed miserably.
What is this shit? What's going on? Why don't they like it? We spent $250 million on this.
These franchises were like watching a train wreck in slow motion, and it didn't stop with that. There was a lot of like other franchises that try to do the same thing, especially with TV shows. Nowadays it's kind of a trend like, oh, we have a saga of movies, let's make a spin-off TV show. Sometimes it works well, for example, with The Penguin. I love that show so much. And it just came off as a spinoff of the original Batman movie made by Matt Reeves. And it was great. But there are so many examples that just failed miserably. So that's another point that it's trying to be something that it's not. While we're in the subject of TV shows, I want to talk also about how long it takes you to finish one show. It seems that nowadays to be in the loop, you have to dedicate your time, just these 40 to 1 hour chunks of time, to basically understand what's going on in any of these sagas, just to stay in the know with all these shows. And to be honest, I just feel like my time is way too valuable for that. And to get to the subject of slop, you can see that these shows are just a way for studios to be like, hey, we're gonna put this out and you're gonna watch it no matter what. So that's something I also wanted to mention and focus on, and also how the quality of these shows just goes down. Just a lot of exposition, a lot of scenes that are just not advancing the story so much. That's a trend I've noticed in recent years. And now for the fourth and final point of the KST is that when you're making something that is slop, it is considered something that is not made primarily for the enjoyment of the audience. Now, I gotta make a very important distinction for this because there are movies that exist to make you uncomfortable, and not necessarily horror movies. Like, for example, there's some like historical dramas or like really deep stories that are aimed to make you think, that make you uncomfortable with some scenes, like especially just like movies that show violence or like sexual themes and that kind of stuff. Like, it's in a way that it's not necessarily for you to enjoy the movie. But what I mean by this, especially, and this one, it goes more for the video game industry. There are games nowadays that are made especially just to not really to make it fun or anything else like that. That is something that exists solely to either make money, take advantage of an existing property, or just, create something that has no artistic merit to it, but you just want to put out there because, people are going to buy it for the name or because it's out or whatever, or just to see like how bad it is. So as an example of this, I'm going to take games based on popular franchises, which is, for example, The Lord of the Rings Gollum, Suicide Squad, the Avengers game that came out in 2020, Walking Dead Destinies, one of the worst games I've ever seen. I think all of these are basically based on properties, but they don't have any intrinsic meaning behind them. So before I wrap the video, I'm going to give more examples on Slop, the video games and properties that I consider Slop. Well, we're on the subject of video games, let's discuss some of these. For example, one of the latest blunders in the industry is Concord. That is a game that had no appeal. It's basically just completely ignorant of what gamers actually want. It was made entirely by a studio that is just suits saying, oh, hero shooters are popular, just make up these characters, put the game out, let's see how it does. And it failed miserably because it fails to understand what the audience wants. And I guess that's like a fifth point I would add to the KST. Slop is just something that is not made by somebody who actually appreciates culture and art and movies and games. If it looks, sounds, and smells like something that you would not play, then it might be Slop. Another recent example, the Star Wars Outlaws. I think that game had everything going for it. It's like, even the protagonist, I feel like if she would have been more interesting, the game would have been much better. But I think the game itself just had a lot of problems that go beyond some of these things, like the protagonist. It's just an absolute pile of trash because of the gameplay, the way it was put together. I believe that games like Red Dead Redemption 2 set the standard so high that other games are not going to reach that point, and it shows throughout these kinds of products. And I call them products because that's basically what they are. Other examples, Forspoken, Redfall, The Last Saints Row. These are all examples of games that I consider slop. Now let's circle back to movies and TV shows because there's plenty more examples. And first of all, I want to go revisit the DCEU, the DC Universe. The last movies of the DCEU, which one were they? Flash, Aquaman, and Shazam. All of these movies were slop. They were not movies that were made with a purpose because the universe was basically going to die. They confirmed that from the moment James Gunn announced the new direction DC was going to take. So what do we do with these movies? Just put them out. We already spent so many millions of dollars on them. That's why they failed, especially The Flash. I think it was one of the biggest failures in the history of comic book movies. And just the quality, it shows like people were just depressed working on this movie. They were like, okay, we're just going to put it out. They canceled other movies like Batgirl, and I think it had a lot to do with that. They were just like, so what do we do in this era? And I feel like that ties to the overall theme of just the world being much different than it was a couple of years ago. Like lower quality products are being put out, and that's something where we're going to have to respond with just not buying these kind of games, not going to the movie to see things that are not worth our time. And that's something that I just want to exemplify. I believe that one of the best ways to combat slop is to support independent studios, shows, movies, games, because it shows that people don't really care about huge budgets, but about stories that make them feel. Every time a small studio nobody's heard of before in Eastern Europe, Japan, or the United States makes a huge fortune and becomes an overnight success, it really puts a smile into my face because it is proof that people will support something that is good no matter the budget or where it comes from. Something I've noticed too is that slop is also not limited to movies and entertainment as a whole. I want to use the example of music to exemplify that slop is not limited to these kinds of mediums, but it can be something that is just overly mass produced. For example, in the music industry, most pop can be considered slop because there's a lot of the same thing, exploiting the same formulas. Even most of the most popular artists behave and act in the same kinds of ways, and their music is often tailored and modified for the most amount of people. So with all we've seen in this video, that would classify them in slop territory, and it is not limited to pop either. For example, I listen to a lot of EDM and metal, and even within those genres, there's a lot of slop, like people just exploiting the same formulas, the same patterns, and you can really tell in the final product. All the Marvel movies, the new ones that have been put out, maybe like 99% of them, Deadpool and Wolverine, I don't consider that one slop, but just like the recent and future projects that are being announced. I am not as excited as I was before. Disney live action movies, all of them slop. Until the day we get a Treasure Planet live action movie, I'm not going to watch any of those. Don't even get me started on the Snow White movie that's going to come out. Definitely slop, and yeah, I'm not going to review those. And I think that's just going to be the plan from now on, just not give my attention to things that are not worth it. You could extend it to things on the internet, for example, internet content, scrolling through your phone. I can guarantee you that 99% of the things you see on your phone are just nonsense. Like, there are things that are not going to give you any education. They're not going to make you any smarter. They're not going to add any value to your life besides just distracting you from the things that matter, that are family, art that actually matters, building yourself as a person, your friends. You can go outside and actually have more value than sitting in a movie theater watching a movie that you don't really want to watch. That's another thing. It's like, do we really want to watch these movies? Do we really want to spend time in the movie theater just giving our attention to something that you know exists because a committee put it together and they just had to do it? Well, we just gotta remake. We already remade all the other ones. We're gonna make a remake for Snow White and other movies, so let's just do it. Or, oh, we just announced all these Star Wars. You know what makes money? Oh, Star Wars. Oh, Marvel makes money. Let's just put out the next movie and the next one after that and the next one after that, even though a lot of these just don't lead anywhere. Oh, you know what Marvel is doing? They're making a universe. Let's make our own universe. Oh, it failed. Oh, I wonder why that happened. So yeah, I think I ranted long enough. You probably get the point by now. But yeah, I'm not going to review a lot of these movies that are coming out next year. I'm probably just going to focus on, for example, the ones that I really care about. I like series, TV shows that I actually enjoy. And yeah, I guess that's all for today. So if you like this video, you know the drill. Like, share, and subscribe. See you guys around.